Hey, welcome back. I'm Roger Mittag, and these are the Style Sessions. I'll be your host for this continuous look at traditional beer styles. And today we're going to celebrate and look at two styles. So this one's going to be a bit longer. And we're really going to look at where this whole pale ale phenomenon started from. And so therefore we need to go back to England again and take a look at what we call pale ales. So pale ales were created in the 1600s. And we know that from a historical perspective that they were called pale ales because they were paler in color than British brown beers. And to understand why they were suddenly paler is to understand how heating had changed. So let me pour this beer for you first, and then I'll talk about the attributes, and then we can go into a little bit further on the history. So the beer I am featuring today is Eagle Bombardier. And Eagle used to be called Charles Wells Brewing, but it's also part of Marston Brewing as well, which is a very, very old traditional British brewery. I am using a dimpled mug because it's very traditional as well. It's also an amazing vessel for a beer that is really malt forward, has lots of caramel characteristics to it. So in a mug like this, you can afford to be a little bit more aggressive on the pour. Because it's wide, you don't have to worry too much about excessive foaming. So I started off, I built this really nice foam to it. We're going to stop right there and give you a look at what this beautiful pale ale is. Now you'll notice it's not pale. It's not pale golden like we would traditionally look at lagers these days, but it's got this beautiful color to it. It reminds me of caramel, rust, burnt orange, whiskey. I mean, these are great ways of describing some of these beers because it creates this really romantic vision of what it is that you're about to drink. The foam is an old ivory color. It's really tight little bubbles, very, very creamy on top, crystal clear again. So aromatically, what you're looking for in a British pale ale is a variety of different things. Now, leading with malt characteristics, again, the things that we look for are, as I mentioned earlier, caramel, toffee, maybe a little bit of butterscotch, brown sugar, whole grain or whole wheat breads, a little bit of artisanal honey, not Billy Bee honey or light colored golden honey, but more of an artisanal clover kind of honey. And then we start getting into some other characteristics. So that's the first part of it. Second part is, from a hop perspective, what you should be looking for, again, with British style hops is a little bit more earthiness, a little bit more forest floor, mushrooms, soil, those kind of things. And then we've got these really neat yeast attributes. So sometimes you'll pick up red licorice on these beers. You're going to pick up apricot or stone fruit. You'll pick up some orange marmalade. There's some really wonderful characteristics. They're very full body, very full flavored, but they're extremely smooth and easy to drink. It's soft and gentle from a carbonation perspective because British beers typically are slightly lower in CO2. And that's because historically, most British people drank in the pub, and lots of CO2 will fill you up and make you feel gassy, and then you're going to want to leave early instead of spending the night enjoying your time with your friends and your mates. So a little softer in the CO2, moderate finish, little longer aftertaste in there where you might pick up a little bit of nuttiness, a little bit of chocolate, definitely some toffee, a little bit more burnt sugar kind of characteristics in there. And again, this style of beer has a lot of the same characteristics aromatically as it does in the flavor profile and on your palate. So things that you should look for are the whole grain breads, the darker breads, brown breads, caramel, toffee on the mouth. It's unlikely that you're going to get a tremendous amount of the apricot or stone fruit on the palate, but what you might find is that you're getting a little bit of tea dryness. So a little bit of orange pekoe tea. Those are the tannins that we sometimes get from hops and adding a little bit more bitterness to the beer. Amazing beer though. This is one of my favorites that I feature in a lot of classes all the time because it is very, very iconic and it is exactly the way it probably should have been. Now the interesting thing about these beers is that gradually over time, when we get into the 17 and 1800s, the names changed from pale ales to bitters. And that was because they were more bitter than British milds at that time. So let's go back and understand how these beers were actually made. So in the 1600s, heating techniques started to change, and brewers started using more refined heating techniques like coke, which is coal. So that meant that you could control the temperature of the heat used to roast the malts. That meant that you could actually create lighter colored malts without burning the heck out of it. So we started seeing these beers that were lighter in color. Now I say that is, in previous sessions I've said, that's a really interesting part because it was British malting techniques that basically changed the face of the earth, because the lighter we started going with temperature controls, the lighter the malts, the more golden colored the beers, the more thirst quenching and easy drinking, and that led us right into Pilsners. But these are very, very iconic styles, and they're a lot different than American Pale Ales, because American Pale Ales have a hop forward characteristic to it, whereas I would say British Pale Ales are definitely more malt forward and malt centric. So we'll talk about American Pale Ales much later in the program, because we are focusing on traditional beer styles, and most of these beer styles were created in Europe. So let me go to a second style that is very, very similar to that, and that would be the Irish Red. So Irish Red, the beer I'm going to feature is Smithwick's, and Smithwick's is a red ale. Now the interesting thing about red ales is they are really just Irish versions of British Pale Ales. They are slightly darker. So let me pour one for you. And then we can have a look and talk a little bit about some of the subtle differences between these beers. So Smithwick's is owned by Diageo, or Guinness, and is still brewed in Ireland. So there we have it. There you've got this beautiful red beer. What you will notice, hopefully you can see that on camera, is that the pale ale is a little bit lighter in color, where I might say that with the red ale we're starting to look at more mahogany colors, more chestnut brown, reddish brown colors to it. Really nice foam. Again, some of that old ivory color to it. It's very light cream. It's really nice. I think the biggest thing for me on red ales is you tend to get more toffee than caramel. There's also a hint of smoke in there because we're using some darker colored malts, so you should get a little bit more roasted, smoky characteristics in there. I don't think you'll find very much on the earthy side with these. They tend to be a little bit drier, have a little bit of mouthfeel to it, and a much longer finish and aftertaste than you would see in a traditional British ale. So it's basically a step up from British Pale Ales and probably a step down from the brown ales that we looked at. But these are amazing beers that go so wonderfully with different foods. I encourage you to go and try whatever British Pale Ales you can. There are obviously craft brewers in North America that are making British style beers as well, so feel free to go and have some fun and play with the category. We don't see a lot of British ales anymore in Canada. We're starting to see a little bit less on the import side of it, but then again, craft brewers are picking that up. So thanks again for joining us. Next time we will be talking about stouts. And so I hope that you'll join us for that. We'll take a look at 3 different kinds of stouts, and we'll talk a little bit about how stouts were created, and then go to these 3 different styles and show you what's different in every one of these beers. So love being with you. Thanks very much. Cheers.